25 years ago, an entire fourth grade class from Ember Ridge Elementary in Riverside, Oregon vanished during what should have been a routine field trip to Mount Hood National Forest. The disappearance of 14 children, their teacher Mr. Vincent Torres, and a bus driver named Jim Walsh sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community and launched one of the most extensive missing persons investigations in Oregon's history. But sometimes the truth remains buried for decades, waiting for one determined mother to uncover the devastating reality that no one could have imagined. Before we begin this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe. Margaret Maggie Carter woke on the morning of October 15th, 2024, with the familiar weight of dread settling in her chest. The gray Portland sky outside her apartment window seemed to mirror her somber mood as she prepared herself for what had become the most difficult day of every year. It was exactly 25 years since her son Danny had disappeared. Slowly, Maggie rose from her bed and made her way to the dresser where a framed photograph of Danny in his Ember Ridge Elementary uniform hung on the mirror. She gently lifted the photo, her fingers tracing his 8-year-old face, his gap-toothed smile frozen in time. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice already thick with emotion. The years had taught Maggie to steel herself against the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume her each October 15th. She had survived the worst of times, the initial search efforts, the media circus, the false leads, the gradual acceptance that Danny might never come home. Yet somehow, she had found the strength to keep going. After washing her face and getting dressed in her usual black attire for this day, Maggie checked her phone. There was a text from Carol Winters, her closest friend and fellow victim's mother. "Thinking of you today, Maggie. Emma's flowers are ready. Coffee at my place at 10? You shouldn't be alone." Carol's daughter Emma had been Danny's best friend and was also on that ill-fated bus. Over the years, the two mothers had formed an unbreakable bond, supporting each other through therapy sessions, court hearings, and the long, dark nights when hope seemed impossible. Maggie replied, "I'll be there. Bringing those Earl Grey cookies you like." Before leaving her apartment, Maggie went to the kitchen and gathered a small care package. Homemade cookies, specialty tea, and a bottle of Carol's favorite wine. Even in her grief, she couldn't bear the thought of arriving empty-handed at her friend's home. As she stepped out into the crisp Portland morning, Maggie couldn't help but notice how little the neighborhood had changed in 25 years. The same craftsman houses lined the tree-heavy streets, their autumn decorations a stark reminder of the season when her world had collapsed. The normalcy of it all sometimes felt like a cruel joke. How could the world keep spinning when hers had stopped? Carol's house in the Selwood neighborhood was a comfort to Maggie. The warm craftsman-style home with its inviting front porch had become a sanctuary over the years. Carol opened the door before Maggie could knock, enveloping her friend in a tight hug. "Come in, honey," Carol said softly, ushering Maggie inside. "I've got the kettle on." The familiar surroundings of Carol's living room provided some measure of peace. The walls were adorned with photos of Emma at various ages, a shrine to a life cut short. Maggie settled onto the comfortable sofa, while Carol busied herself in the Kit Carter. "How are you holding up?" Carol asked when she returned with steaming mugs of tea. Maggie sighed, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "You know how it is. I tell myself I'm prepared for this day, but it never gets easier. 25 years, Carol. Sometimes I can't believe it's been that long." Carol nodded knowingly. "I finished my grief counseling last spring, but Dr. Martinez warned me that anniversaries would still be challenging. I've accepted what happened, mostly, but days like today." She trailed off, stirring her tea absently. "I called Detective Harrison yesterday," Maggie admitted. "Left a voicemail asking if there were any updates. I know it's pointless after all this time, but I can't help myself." "Oh, Maggie," Carol said gently. "You know there haven't been any leads in years." The case went cold, and with Detective Morrison retiring and Harrison taking over, they've essentially moved on. Maggie knew her friend was right, but the small part of her that refused to give up hope couldn't let go entirely. She had spent years chasing false leads, convinced that somewhere out there, Danny was still alive, still waiting for her to find him. "Actually," Carol said, rising from the sofa, "there is something I wanted to show you." The police department released more evidence photos to the families last month. Most of it was stuff we'd seen before. But there was one photograph. She walked to a bookshelf and retrieved a manila envelope. I debated whether to show you this, Carol continued, returning to sit beside Maggie. I didn't want to upset you more than necessary, but I can't stop thinking about it. She opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph, handing it to Maggie with careful hands. The image showed the Ember Ridge Elementary fourth grade class lined up in front of their yellow school bus, the children's excited faces beaming at the camera. Danny stood in the back row, his arm around Emma, both of them grinning widely. But it wasn't the children that caught Maggie's attention. It was the adult figure standing beside the bus driver. Is that Principal Catherine Morse? Maggie asked, her voice filled with confusion. I thought she stayed at school that day. Carol leaned closer, studying the image. That's exactly what I thought too. I remember the initial reports clearly. Mr. Torres, the teacher, and Jim Walsh, the bus driver, took the kids, along with one parent volunteer. Principal Morse was supposed to stay behind to handle school business. Maggie felt her heart rate increase as she examined the photograph more closely. There was no mistaking Principal Morse's tall frame and distinctive silver hair. This doesn't make sense. Why would she be in this photo if she didn't go on the trip? That's what's been bothering me, Carol admitted. I've been going over everything in my mind, trying to remember exactly what we were told that day. When the bus didn't return and the calls started coming in, Principal Morse was at the school. I remember her calling the parents to come in for an emergency meeting. The two women sat in contemplative silence, both lost in memories of that terrible day. The emergency meeting at Ember Ridge Elementary was seared into Maggie's memory. The principal's somber expression, the way she'd wrung her hands as she explained that the bus had never arrived at Mount Hood National Forest, the growing panic as parents realized their children were truly missing. Maybe the photo was taken before they left? Maggie suggested, though doubt crept into her voice. Like a departure photo? But look at the background, Carol pointed out. Those aren't the school grounds. That looks like a parking area near a forest entrance, somewhere along the route to Mount Hood. Maggie studied the background more carefully. Carol was right. The tall evergreen trees and the rustic wooden sign partially visible in the corner of the photo definitely weren't part of Ember Ridge Elementary's urban campus. Carol, Maggie said slowly, a chill running down her spine. What if Principal Morse did go on that trip? What if she lied about staying at school? But why would she lie about something like that? Carol asked, though her voice betrayed her own growing suspicion. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither woman wanted to consider. After 25 years of accepting the official version of events, the possibility that they had been deceived from the very beginning was almost too much to process. I need to talk to her, Maggie said suddenly, standing up with renewed determination. I need to ask Principal Morse about this photograph directly. Carol grabbed her friend's arm gently. Maggie, wait. Think about this. We've been down similar roads before, remember? 3 years ago with the bus maintenance records, 5 years ago with that supposed witness in Bend. Each time we thought we'd found something significant, and each time it led nowhere but more heartache. Maggie understood her friend's caution. They had indeed chased numerous false leads over the years, each one initially filling them with hope before ultimately disappointing them. But something about this photograph felt different, more concrete, more undeniable. This isn't the same thing, Maggie insisted. This is a photograph, Carol. Hard evidence. Either Principal Morse was on that bus or she wasn't. It's a simple question that deserves a simple answer. Carol sighed, recognizing the determined look in her friend's eyes. If you're going to do this, please be careful. Don't let it consume you the way some of the other leads did. And maybe wait until after today. Give yourself some time to process this. But Maggie was already reaching for her coat. The photograph had ignited something in her that she hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but a sense of purpose. I'm sorry, Carol. I know you're trying to protect me, but I can't let this go. Not today of all days. The bus ride from Selwood to Principal Morse's neighborhood in Hawthorne gave Maggie time to collect her thoughts and prepare for what might be a difficult conversation. Catherine Morse had retired from education several years ago and now lived in a modest craftsman house not far from the trendy district's main strip. As the bus wound through the familiar Portland streets, Maggie found herself thinking back to her interactions with Principal Morse during Danny's time at Ember Ridge Elementary. The woman had always been professional, even kind, but there had been something distant about her, a reserve that Maggie had attributed to the demands of running a school. After the disappearance, Principal Morse had been cooperative with the investigation and sympathetic to the families. She had attended several memorial services and had even helped establish a scholarship fund in honor of the missing children. Nothing in her behavior had ever suggested deception or wrongdoing. But now, staring at the photograph in her hands, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that she had been blind to something important. The bus stopped near Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, and Maggie disembarked, checking her phone for the address she had looked up years ago, but never used. The walk through the residential streets gave her additional time to steel herself for what might be an uncomfortable encounter. Principal Morse's house was a charming bungalow with a well-maintained garden and a blue Honda Civic in the driveway. As Maggie approached the front door, she noticed movement in one of the windows. Someone was definitely home. She knocked firmly but politely, her heart racing with anticipation. After a moment, the door opened, but instead of Principal Morse, a young woman in her 20s stood in the doorway. She had dark hair and wore casual clothes, and her expression immediately shifted from curiosity to something approaching alarm when she saw Maggie. "Can I help you?" the young woman asked cautiously. Before Maggie could respond, she heard Principal Morse's voice from inside the house. "Who is it, Jessica?" "There's a woman here to see you," the young woman called back, never taking her eyes off Maggie. Principal Morse appeared behind the younger woman, and Maggie saw immediate recognition followed by obvious discomfort across the older woman's features. "Mrs. Carter," Principal Morse said, her voice strained. "This is unexpected. What brings you here?" Maggie noticed how the principal seemed to position herself protectively in front of the young woman, as if shielding her from view. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Miss Morse. I was hoping we could talk about something. It's about the day the children disappeared." The principal's face went pale, and she glanced nervously at the young woman beside her. "I'm not sure what more I can tell you, Mrs. Carter. I gave my statement to the police years ago, and I've tried to move on from that terrible time." "I understand," Maggie said, pulling out the photograph. "But I recently came across this picture, and I had a question about it." She held up the image, watching Principal Morse's reaction carefully. The older woman's eyes widened slightly, and she seemed to struggle for words. Where did you get that?" Principal Morse asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The police released it to the families last month," Maggie explained. "I was hoping you could tell me when this was taken. Were you on the trip that day, or was this photo taken before the bus left school?" Principal Morse's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the photograph. The young woman, Jessica, moved closer, as if sensing the older woman's distress. This was taken at the school," Principal Morse said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "Before they left. I remember now, I walked out to see them off." "But the background doesn't look like the school," Maggie pressed gently. "Those trees, that wooden sign, it looks more like a forest entrance." "You're mistaken," Principal Morse said, more firmly this time. "It was definitely at the school. My memory isn't what it used to be, but I'm certain I didn't go on that trip." Maggie studied the older woman's face, noting the way she avoided direct eye contact and the tension in her shoulders. Something was definitely wrong here. "Ms. Morse," Maggie said carefully, "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm just a mother who still has questions after 25 years. If there's anything at all, that you remember about that day that might help the families find closure." "There's nothing," Principal Morse snapped, then immediately looked ashamed of her outburst. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. This is just... It's very difficult for me, too. I lost 14 students that day. It nearly destroyed my career, my life. I've spent years trying to heal from that trauma." The young woman, Jessica, placed a comforting hand on Principal Morse's shoulder, and Maggie couldn't help but notice the intimate familiarity of the gesture. Who was this young woman? And why did she seem so protective of the former principal? "I understand," Maggie said softly. I'm sorry for upsetting you. I should go. As she turned to leave, she heard Jessica speak for the first time since opening the door. Wait. Both Maggie and Principal Morse turned to look at the young woman, who seemed to be wrestling with some internal conflict. Jessica, no, Principal Morse said quickly, her voice filled with warning. But Jessica stepped forward, her eyes meeting Maggie's with an intensity that was almost unsettling. You said you're Danny Carter's mother. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. How did this stranger know her son's name? Yes, she managed to say. How did you? Danny was always talking about his mom's cooking, Jessica said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. He said you made the best chocolate chip cookies in the world, and he was going to ask you to pack some for the trip. The world seemed to tilt around Maggie as the implications of Jessica's words sank in. There was only one way this young woman could know such specific details about Danny's plans for the field trip. Who are you? Maggie whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. Principal Morse grabbed Jessica's arm, trying to pull her back toward the house. Jessica, we can't. It's too dangerous. Think about what we discussed. But Jessica pulled away, her decision apparently made. My name is Jessica Walsh, she said, her voice growing stronger. I was on that bus 25 years ago. I was one of the missing children. Maggie felt her knees go weak as Jessica's words registered. She gripped the porch railing for support, staring at the young woman with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. That's impossible, she breathed. Jessica Walsh, you were presumed dead. Your parents, they held a memorial service. I know, Jessica said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I've been watching from a distance for years. I know about the memorial stones at Riverview Cemetery. I know my parents visit every month. I know they never stopped looking for me. Principal Morse had gone completely white and seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Jessica, please. You don't understand the consequences of this. We agreed. No, Jessica interrupted, her voice rising. You convinced me to stay silent, but maybe that was wrong. Maybe it's time for the truth. Maggie's mind raced with questions, but she forced herself to focus on the most important one. Jessica, if you're alive, do you know what happened to the others? Do you know what happened to Danny? The pain that crossed Jessica's face answered the question before she spoke. Mrs. Carter, I'm so sorry. Danny didn't make it. None of the other children made it. The words hit Maggie like a physical blow, even though part of her had known for years that Danny was gone. But to hear it confirmed, to finally know for certain, brought both devastating grief and strange relief. What happened? She asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Jessica glanced nervously at Principal Morse, who was shaking her head frantically. If I tell you, there's no going back, Jessica warned, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt everyone. I need to know, Maggie said firmly. I've spent 25 years wondering, hoping, imagining every possible scenario. Whatever the truth is, I can handle it. Jessica took a deep breath and stepped fully out onto the porch, as if crossing a threshold she could never return from. The field trip was a lie, she began. We never went to Mount Hood National Forest. The bus driver, Jim Walsh, he wasn't taking us to see autumn leaves. He was taking us to a meeting point near the Columbia River where other people were waiting. Principal Morse made a strangled sound and sank down onto the porch steps, her head in her hands. Principal Morse arranged everything, Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. She owed money to some very dangerous people, gambling debts that had spiraled out of control. They threatened her sister's family in Seattle. She was desperate. Maggie felt sick to her stomach as the horrifying picture began to take shape. The children were sold. The plan was to take us across the border into Canada, and then, yes, to people who were part of a trafficking network. The men who bought children for. Jessica's voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. But something went wrong that first day. They gave some of the children too much sedative to keep them quiet during transport. Danny was one of them. He never woke up. Emma too. And 3 of the boys. Maggie closed her eyes, trying to process the unimaginable horror of what her son had experienced in his final hours. At the same time, she felt a terrible gratitude that his suffering had been brief. How did you survive? She asked. I was separated from the others early on because I was smaller and caused less trouble. The man who bought me kept me for 12 years before I managed to escape. When I finally got away, I was so damaged, so afraid, that I couldn't face going home. I couldn't face my parents after what had been done to me. Jessica's voice was steady now, as if telling the story had freed her from some invisible weight. I somehow found Principal Morse's address and came to her house. I was sleeping in doorways, stealing food, completely broken. She took me in, got me medical help, helped me build a new life. But in exchange, she made me promise never to tell anyone what really happened. Why? Maggie asked, though she was beginning to understand. She said it would only cause more pain for the families, that knowing the truth wouldn't bring the children back, but would add unbearable trauma to the grief you were already carrying. She convinced me that staying hidden was an act of mercy. Principal Morse finally looked up from her hands, her face streaked with tears. I was trying to protect everyone, she said. The families didn't need to know the details of how their children died. And Jessica, she needed time to heal, to rebuild herself. Coming forward would have meant more investigations, more trauma, media attention. You were protecting yourself, Maggie said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. You were covering up your crimes. I know how it looks, Principal Morse said desperately, but I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I thought they would just move the children to a different location, maybe hold them for ransom. I never imagined they would. You sold 14 children to human traffickers, Maggie stated flatly. Whatever you imagined would happen is irrelevant. The three women stood in heavy silence on the porch, the weight of 25 years of lies and cover-ups settling around them like a suffocating blanket. Finally, Jessica spoke again. Mrs. Carter, I need you to know that Danny talked about you constantly during those final hours. He was scared, but he kept saying his mom would find him. He believed in you completely. The words were both a comfort and a knife to Maggie's heart. She reached out and took Jessica's hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you for telling me, she said. And Jessica, what happened to you? What you survived, none of that was your fault. Your parents love you. They never stopped loving you. Jessica nodded, fresh tears flowing. I know. I think I'm finally ready to go home. The Portland Police Bureau was bustling with activity when Maggie, Jessica, and a reluctant Principal Morse arrived that afternoon. Detective Lisa Harrison, who had taken over Danny's case when Detective Morrison retired, was initially skeptical of Jessica's claims. But as Jessica provided details that only someone who had been present could know, the detective's demeanor shifted to one of focused intensity. I need to call in the FBI, Detective Harrison said after Jessica had given her initial statement. If this involves human trafficking across state and international borders, it's beyond our jurisdiction. Principal Morse sat in the interview room, her composure completely shattered. When confronted with Jessica's testimony and the threat of federal charges, she broke down and confessed to her role in the conspiracy. I never wanted children to die, she sobbed to the detectives. I just owed Marcus Volkov so much money, and he said his people would hurt my sister's children if I didn't help. I thought maybe they would just hold the kids for a few days and then release them when I could pay back the debt. The confession revealed the horrifying details of the conspiracy. Principal Morse had arranged for the fake field trip and had personally accompanied the children to ensure they boarded the correct vehicle at the pickup point. Jim Walsh, the bus driver, had been paid off to deliver the children to traffickers connected to the Volkov crime organization, which operated throughout the Pacific Northwest. What happened to the other children? Detective Harrison asked. The ones who didn't die from the sedatives? Principal Morse's voice was barely audible. They were taken to different locations. Some were transported to Canada, others to California. I was told they would be sold to people who wanted children. I tried not to think about the details. Jessica provided additional information about the trafficking network, describing locations and people she remembered from her 12 years of captivity. Her testimony would prove crucial in the FBI's expanded investigation. As word of the arrest spread, other families of the missing children began arriving at the police station. Carol Winters broke down when she learned that her daughter Emma had died on the first day, sparing her years of abuse, but robbing her of any chance of survival. At least we know, Carol said through her tears, holding tightly to Maggie's hand. After all these years of wondering, we finally know. The arrest of Principal Catherine Morse made national headlines, reopening one of Oregon's most infamous cold cases. The revelation that one of the missing children had been alive all these years shocked the community and prompted the FBI to launch a multi-state investigation into the trafficking network that had destroyed so many lives. Jessica's reunion with her parents was both joyful and heartbreaking. Thomas and Linda Walsh had never remarried after their daughter's disappearance, holding on to hope even when reason suggested it was futile. Their first meeting in 25 years took place at the police station, with counselors present to help navigate the complex emotions involved. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long," Jessica said through tears as her parents embraced her. "I was so broken, so ashamed of what had been done to me. I thought you wouldn't want me back." "We never stopped looking," her father said. "We never stopped loving you. Nothing that happened to you was your fault." The investigation that followed Jessica's testimony led to several more arrests and the rescue of other trafficking victims across the country. While most of the Ember Ridge Elementary children had died years earlier, 3 other survivors were located and reunited with their families. Principal Morse was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for her role in the conspiracy. The judge noted that her position of trust made her crimes particularly heinous, and that her years of silence had prevented justice and prolonged the family's suffering. For Maggie, the truth brought a complex mixture of emotions. The knowledge that Danny had suffered only briefly was a small comfort, but the reality of how he had died was almost unbearable. At the same time, finally knowing what had happened allowed her to begin a different kind of healing process. "I spent 25 years imagining Danny growing up somewhere else, maybe with a family who couldn't have children of their own," she told Carol during one of their regular coffee meetings. In some ways, that fantasy was easier than the truth, but living with uncertainty was its own kind of torture. The community of Riverside, Oregon, established a new memorial for the Ember Ridge Elementary victims, replacing the previous one that had been based on incomplete information. Jessica spoke at the dedication ceremony, her words providing comfort to families who had waited decades for answers. "These children died because adults failed to protect them," she said. "But their memory has inspired changes in how we investigate missing children cases and how we support survivors of trafficking. Their legacy is one of justice and hope." 2 years after the truth was revealed, Maggie still visited Danny's grave every month, but the character of those visits had changed. Instead of the desperate conversations with a child she hoped might still be alive, she now spoke to her son with the calm certainty of a mother saying goodnight. Jessica had begun working with anti-trafficking organizations, using her experience to help identify and rescue other victims. Her recovery was ongoing, but she had found purpose in turning her survival into advocacy for others who had suffered similar fates. The Volkov crime organization was ultimately dismantled by federal authorities, though Marcus Volkov himself was never found. The investigation revealed a network that had operated for decades, trafficking hundreds of children across North America. Carol and Maggie remained close friends, their bond forged in tragedy, but strengthened by truth. They established a foundation in honor of all the Ember Ridge Elementary victims, providing support for families of missing children and funding for improved investigation techniques. "We can't bring our children back," Maggie said during one of the foundation's fundraising events, "but we can make sure their deaths mean something. We can work to protect other children and support other families who are living through their own nightmares." Standing in the audience, Jessica smiled through her tears. After 25 years of silence, the truth had finally set them all free. Not from their grief, which would always remain, but from the uncertainty and false hope that had kept them trapped in the past. The missing class of Ember Ridge Elementary had finally come home, not in the way their families had dreamed, but in the way that mattered most. Their stories had been told, their memories honored, and their legacy transformed from tragedy into a force for justice and protection of other children who might otherwise suffer the same fate. As the evening sun set over Portland, casting long shadows across Riverview Cemetery, 14 small headstones stood as monuments not just to lives lost, but to the truth finally revealed and the healing that could now begin. The search was over. The long journey toward peace had begun.